Emil Cadlick here with FantasyNation.com. I'm really excited to introduce a very seasoned veteran and a fantasy sports pioneer, definitely for sure. Started in the business in the early 1990s. I'd like to welcome Ian Allan of Fantasy Index. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's all nice to talk to you, because we kind of came in side by side. I think it's actually late 80s, 87 for us, and then a year or two later for you, I think.
Yeah, I apologize. You were in the earlier days. As a matter of fact, looking out, it said that you were a journalist in college, and you did a lot of publishing there. Tell me about the college experience there.
Well, yeah, I went to the University of Washington with the idea, hey, I'll be some kind of science guy. My dad's a chemistry professor. And it's kind of like, I don't know if it's going to be math or science or whatever. And I spent a year or so in that track at Washington. And then it's kind of like, okay, yeah, you're not in that group. Okay, so now what plan B? And then got into working for the student paper there on campus. As did my business partner, Bruce Taylor, who was on the same deal. He was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to be a math or science guy. He also ended up in journalism. So we both graduated from in journalism at the University of Washington, but have some kind of science leanings.
Interesting. When did you meet Bruce? Was it in college, or did you know him before?
In the mid-'80s, there we're both, we're journalism students, so we're taking some of the same classes. And then it was January of 1986 was we're going to do this class where it's not on campus. It's at the Capitol, Olympia, and you live down in Olympia and you work for a paper, and every day you file a story about something that's happening in the legislature. So anyway, we're sharing a house down there, and one of the other guys in that house, Mike Yantis, I can still remember, he was in a fantasy football league, and he started explaining this game, fantasy football, and I can remember him turning and pointing, and he says, you would absolutely love this game. This game is perfect for you. You're going to love it. So he told us about this game, fantasy football. So I was hooked on fantasy football before I had ever played a game. Wow. I actually published a sort of magazine. I was commissioner of 2 leagues. This is all before I've even played at all. Set up 2 leagues for that fall. In fact, I've got the deal. I was thinking, well, maybe we'll end up talking about what I consider to be the first edition of our fantasy football. Let me see. So it's like a cool picture, and I've got these are all like all the stats on the quarterbacks. I got a page on quarterbacks. This is before we've ever even played. We're going to hand this out to everybody. We got 12 guys in the league. Everybody's going to get a draft kit. So we've got a page on quarterbacks, a page on running backs, wide receivers, their schedules. And this was the roster sheet on the back. So, I got into it. I was hooked before, I'd even played.
You played. So what year was that you did that draft guide?
So that was 86. 1986. And as luck would have it, in hindsight, that's like the most interesting year of the last 40 years for fantasy football. I would love to see what you would do if you were to get in a time machine, go back and do one of your pro forecast magazines. 1986, you have all these great players from the USFL that are getting plugged into the league.
Oh, I forgot about that.
So where are you going to rank Herschel Walker, Kelvin Bryant, Gary Clark, Steve Young, all these guys getting dumped into the league? That's a phenomenal, exciting, dimension for a draft. And then you've also got the number 1 pick of the draft is Bo Jackson. He says he's not playing. So where are you drafting Bo Jackson? Are you drafting him in the 3rd round, assuming he's definitely playing, or is he a stash him with the last round? He says he's going to play baseball. So he's obviously very talented. Where are you ranking him? So 1986, in hindsight, wow, that was like the granddaddy of years for putting together a fantasy football magazine or whatever. If you're in the business of forecasting what's going to happen, 1986 is a phenomenal year.
Yeah, that's a great story. So you got out of college then, and in '87 you started your magazine.
So anyway, yes, we were talking about starting fantasy football magazines. Thank you for prodding me back on topic. So we played 1 year. We played '86, and it was great. It was phenomenal. It was everything I thought it would be. And in January of '87, hey, I'm looking for ways. How can we make this league better? Add more guys, or hey, I need to get in a third league. We need to start more of these leagues. Now Bruce had the idea. It's like, hey, wait a minute. We publish. That's what we do. We can publish. We've been putting together, newspapers here on campus for years. We know how to lay things out and write. That's what we do. Why don't we write a fantasy football magazine? Now that first year we had used football. One of our buddies worked for Don Heinrich's Pro Preview, which is a great written, just not a fantasy magazine, but just a regular pro football preview. That's what we would use when we were, previewing. If you look at the layout of a Don Heinrich's Pro Preview and compare it to our fantasy football magazine, you'll see some similarities. That was kind of the template we used initially on the startup. And this guy who had worked there, he was able to connect us with some people on how you would start a magazine. So anyway, Bruce, in the spring of '87, was in a class, Creativity and Innovation, which my dad teaches. My dad is actually still teaching. He's 89. He's the oldest working professor at the University of Washington. He still teaches that class. So as that class, it's mainly they bring in some guest speakers. Hey, how do you get a creative idea and then take that first step towards making it a reality? So Bruce was taking that class, and he says, well, my project is going to be to create a fantasy football magazine. That will be my project. And as the first step, we'll actually, make one. Because, we know how to publish. We know how to write and lay things out and do that sort of stuff. So we put one together and we printed 5,000 magazines, or I think, in 1987. And then that's just kind of the start of the adventure. Okay, now you got to get them on newsstands, which I will be interested, to kind of compare notes how this happened for you.
Yeah.
So in those days, there's a different magazine wholesaler in every city. So what we did was, hey, let's call every city. We talked, and now there was not only the big ones, but there's these little guys. Like, what if you don't get in with the big wholesaler? There's these kind of small guys who have accounts with bookstores and stuff like that. So anyway, let's get on the phone and start calling people and say, hey, would you be interested in taking 200 fantasy football magazines? Now, in 1987, when you're making that phone call, 80% of the people answering the phone don't know what fantasy football is. So you got to explain, no, hey, yeah, we think there's people who play fantasy football and they're going to buy these magazines. And most people aren't interested in taking your magazines, but some are. And some of these people, now these are not big chains that are dealing with Time Magazine and all the Sports Illustrated. These are smaller people who are running their own business that have some skin in the game. They're interested in selling magazines. I remember the late Paul Paulson in Minnesota. He was the first guy who took a bunch of magazines and then called back. It's like, people are buying those fantasy football magazines and send me some more. So Minnesota, he was like the first guy we had a real great experience with. Wisconsin, there was some of these guys. So we got some pockets going. And then we stumbled into one thing with Walden Books agreed to take, this was in that first year, they agreed to take, I don't know if it was 20 or 30 for each of their stores in the country, and we got a thing. So anyway, for that first year, we sold enough where it's like, well, we sold enough magazines, we can do another fantasy football magazine in '88. We didn't lose everything, so let's do another one in '88. And I think it was kind of '89. Where it's kind of like, oh yeah, this thing is profitable. It's kind of working and kind of getting off the ground a little bit, and then kind of really got it going in '89, '90 or so.
That's fantastic. That's a great story. Having to call those people and get a hold of them. I guess eventually you got a distributor to do that kind of thing for you.
Yes, it was like '89, I think. And then we're going to get a national distributor where we're going to get out of cold cocking people on the phone. That's what it was. The same with photos and media guides back in the day. You want info. There's no internet in '88, '87. So just to get the statistics and the backgrounds of some of these players, you want to call all the teams and get media guides. You want to get some black and white photos because hey, we're not buying photos at that time. A lot of the teams gave away decent black and white photos, and there were some teams where yeah, we're not going to deal with fantasy football people. We're not sending stuff out. And then there were other ones that were more welcoming. And it's the same sort of deal. You got to explain, hey, here's what fantasy football is. And we think there's people playing, and we'd like to get, hello, are you still there? You know, some people are just hanging up on you, and other people are, you know, going to help you on. We were very fortunate. Our first year, we had the Miami Dolphins sent up a nice slide, a color slide of Dan Marino. So he was on the cover of our first edition in '87. You know, because after playing for 1 year, now we're, you know, felt, hey, we're ready now to. We've played 1 year. We're now ready to. We're experts now, and we're ready to start telling everybody else how to play.
It must have been. Was it hard to get the money back from those wholesalers that first year? Because I know that's one of the problems that a distributor solves for you is they have some clout.
Now, when I'm talking about wholesalers, I'm talking little independent people, and those guys were good. They worked hard, and they weren't just drawing a salary. So I was very impressed with a lot of those.
So they said, "Oh, you sold 30%. Here's your money," and you didn't have to bug them about it.
Yeah. There's different ways to negotiate it. One way is they've got to send you the cover of every magazine that doesn't sell, or the masthead. Is this ringing bells to you? You remember this?
Yeah, I just remember worrying about that they wouldn't timely send the money to you. You know, that was concern.
That's you got to kind of put yourself out there a little bit. So you got to kind of take a chance, and it kind of worked out well for you, and worked out pretty well for us.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess there was the Grogan said they did something in '86. I've never actually seen a copy of it or whatnot, and they said it was fantasy, but it wasn't called fantasy. I'd like to know more. I'm going to talk to them in a few days. And then Krause was doing a baseball right around the time that you were getting started, or a little after. They didn't actually start a football.
I think they started in baseball, and then they were doing both. I think they might have been calling their thing Krause Baseball, and then saying, hey, here's our football edition, but having baseball on the title, which I don't think is great marketing.
Well, baseball was the thing.
Differently, right?
Baseball was the thing back then. You know, it was bigger than football. At least that's my recollection.
Yes, or people thought.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I tried to play baseball a couple of times. I'm just a football fan.
Yeah. And
even more so now than it was, because when we started moving into the mid-'90s or so, it's like, hey, there's other people doing this now. I've got to be good. I have to know everything about football. I can't spend my time watching the World Series. I can't spend my time watching the March Madness tournament. I have to be good at football. You know, that's what I have to work on. That's what I got to put my resources in. That's what I get paid to do. So let's focus on football and get good at that. So I've really kind of trimmed out those other sports as we've gone along.
Well, evidently you did most of the writing for the magazine?
Yes. I am a football specialist. I've got a whole stuff. I'm working on the 2020 edition right here, trying to find some interesting things to say, trying to find insights, trying to make it, you got to put together something that's worth paying for, right? So you got to keep your readers happy. You got to find something good to say.
Yeah. Now, did Bruce help at all with the writing ever?
Now, he is doing more of the, hey, how do we get the magazine put together, and dealing with, hey, we got a fire here with wholesalers or with advertisers or programmers. So he's working more on the business side as opposed to, he's not doing the content stuff.
Cool. And I was reading, and when you started to do when did you start the fantasyindex.com site?
We initially had the deal, obviously, way back, we were where we were just fantasy football, and then we put the year there, which was exactly the way the Don Heinrichs magazine was, pro preview, and then the big year written there. And then in the mid-'90s, I'm not going to try and pull the edition out, somewhere along the line, it's like, well, why do we have that big year there? We all know it's 2020, big 20 on there. So we trimmed that out in the mid-'90s.
Oh, okay.
But fantasy football, when we initially did it, it did not occur to us, hey, somebody else might write a fantasy football magazine someday. And so we just had fantasy football on it. We got to put something to create more of a brand. We did not do a great job of creating, a brand name. Because we were just thinking, hey, we're doing a fantasy football magazine. We could have done a better job of creating a brand and having distinguishing marks in there. But we got in there early enough that we were just, fantasy football. So we added the word index underneath fantasy football in the mid 90s. And so then when we created our website, we're just fantasyindex.com.
Yeah, I think that worked out really well for you. The other thing I don't want to forget is the cheat sheet. Were you the first to start cheat sheets in the magazines?
Yeah, that was the thing. We started doing the magazine, and then the natural thing is you've done this magazine, you printed that in June. Well, stuff changes in August. And so, hey, let's start doing a thing where we update the cheat sheet and then have a few notes for each of the teams. And so that started
the actual name cheat sheet as part of the magazine. Were you guys who started that? Do you remember?
Yes. Yeah, I think that was Bruce was the guy. I was never a guy that used that term cheat sheet. I think Bruce we started, I think the first cheat sheets, the first time we used it would be in those updates that we put out in August. Mm-hmm. That would be late 80s. And then I think if we got the magazines out and flipped them around, it'd be 89 or 90 where, hey, now let's just start putting a page in the magazine where all of the advice and talk, you summarize it all and just put it on one page and call it a cheat sheet. I think that'd be like 89 or 90.
Now, another thing you guys did that was fantastic and a milestone for, the fantasy sports business was your experts polls. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was 1990 where we got the idea, hey, let's, we have all these recommendations, let's have a few of the, the advertisers and have them in there and they can provide their top 20 at each position. And then we started thinking, then you could average their picks and create kind of an AP, like the AP football poll, and we can use, 10 or 15. I think we got 20 or 25 experts at one point, and then average all those picks and create kind of a consensus top 20 based on where everybody else was ranking them, and then let the guys debate why they feel so-and-so is going to be a great quarterback or a lousy quarterback, and why so-and-so is not going to be able to do what he did last year. So that's a nice feature where you let some people have a voice and show what they, give readers a little sample of the way they think. So, yeah, that's something we've been doing. I think we're up to about 30 years on that now.
That's incredible. Yeah, I think that's a great feature that you guys created. Obviously, a lot of people copied that. I don't even remember. I'll have to go back and look at my first magazine. I'm sure I had a cheat sheet, but I don't think I called it that. I think I called it a quick list or something. I don't know. But certainly something that people like to take into drafts and mark off as they draft, even back way in the late 80s and the early 1990s. That's a great feature you guys came up with. And you also graded the experts, so then there was a accuracy ranking or whatever, coming into the next year, so people knew how well they did.
We have graded them a lot of different ways. There is no super perfect way to grade them. We've been playing around with the mixture on that for years, and now we grade it kind of multiple different ways just to underscore that, hey, so-and-so wins if you score it this way, but if you score it this other way, then maybe someone else wins. And, a lot of whatever way you're going to score it, if you're trying to score all 20 players, it typically comes down to, hey, who got hurt and missed 2/3 of the year? Were you high on Andrew Luck, which would be a reasonable guy to be high on in June of last year? Then when he missed the whole year and he was your number 2 quarterback, you're not going to be our overall winner this year. But does that mean that your opinions didn't have merit, or is that kind of the way it kind of played out? So we score them, but try and tell people, let's not get too hung up on the, just because somebody finishes, 20th or 17th and the overall rankings doesn't necessarily mean that this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Maybe he had some great picks that just didn't happen to work out that year.
So the website, and maybe even before the website, the preseason updates, tell me how that evolved.
Well, we started off, the first one that we did, I called it the gold sheet. It was the text on the teams would be in white, and then there'd be a bright yellow piece of paper that would be in that would have the cheat sheet on it. It would be called the gold sheet. So we did that for a few weeks, and then the guys from Mort Olshawn. Does that name ring a bell with you?
Say it again.
Mort Olshawn.
Nope, doesn't.
He was a gambler guy down in Las Vegas who had a column that was nationally syndicated, including in the Seattle Times, and his thing was called the Gold Sheet.
I remember the name. I didn't remember the person. Yeah.
So why are you guys calling your fantasy football product the Gold Sheet? I mean, that's the name of our deal, and I hadn't even occurred to me. It's like, oh yeah, I must have. I mean, I used to see that in the paper all the time. So that's when we changed it from Gold Sheet to Cheat Sheet. It was a reasonable request. It's like, yeah, we're not trying to steal anybody's idea or create confusion, so we'll change it, and went to Cheat Sheet. So back then it would be you buy the magazine, you have a magazine, and then if you want to get this cheat sheet, we'll mail it to you. So the idea is, hey, we'll watch the preseason games and follow the news, make the adjustments, and then however many of these things we have, we got to print them out on Sunday, stick them in envelopes, and get them mailed out on Monday morning, and they will show up in your mailbox on probably Thursday of that week, and then you got it for your weekend draft. That was the initial model. It seemed simple. Only
this was in preseason?
Yeah, this is preseason only, nothing during the season. And we start selling those. And then I think it was in 89 or maybe 90, all of a sudden the phones kind of blew up. People say that fantasy football kind of blew up with the internet, yet no, not for us. It was like 90 was the time where, hey, the phone starts ringing. As soon as you hang it up, you can't count to 5 without the phone ringing again. Everybody wants these updates, and we've got to, on the fly in early August, like, hey, we got to figure out how to get 5, 6 phone lines in here because the phone's ringing off the hook. And now we're printing, 6,000 of these things on dittos. We can't put those in envelopes anymore. So we start printing them on 11 by 17 and kind of folding them and then sealing it with a sticker. And, you can't put who's got 6,000 stamps and licking stuff. So we got to get a postal permit. This needs to be done. Yeah. And then you account set up with the mail. So you're going in with trays of stuff for the post office. So that was hopping and popping, man. So, yeah, fantasy football did not, arrive for us with the internet. We were pre-internet. 1990. It was crazy. Hey, you got to buy more computers because we need headsets. You got to take orders on the phone. All this kind of stuff. All it's got to be figured out. So that initially it is by the mail. Then, there's fax machines are kind of coming in at that time, and guys are like, well, fax it to me. I don't want to wait till Thursday. I want to get it sooner than that. So now we've got a bunch of guys who want to get it by fax. Only, it takes a while to send out a fax. If it's a 3-page fax, which was what this was, a 3-page product, you got to feed it through, and you're getting more orders than you can actually send out. So my brother Rob was able to figure out how to do broadcast faxing, where it's like, hey, take these 200 numbers, fax to all of them. Now there's going to be everybody's fax machine was different at the time, so we're going to have to still have a couple of fax machines for the guys who need, I got to answer it first and then switch it over, this kind of thing. Yeah. But that's the thing we've got. So we got some guys who are doing it by fax. We have people showing up at the house too.
Whoa.
Which until finally my mom put her foot down. I'm still living at home at this time, running out of my parents' basement. And she's got, we got the same where people are just coming by the house, want to pay cash. And my mom was like, hey, the neighbors are going to think you guys are drug dealers. I don't want anybody coming to the house anymore. So that happened. So then it was a 93, you start making the shift from mail, fax, and now we're going to add email also to the deal. So then mid-90s, we're selling it all 3 ways, and it's, you got this product, and then you got to figure out, some people are getting it by mail, some people are getting it by fax, and then we've got this email in there too, which has gradually taken over. Email is the most efficient way to, move that kind of information around. People get it sooner, they print it out on their own. you don't have the cost of mailing things around or faxing it around. So that ended up taking over. Although I guess now there's also the thing of, they don't even get an email. It's just on the web and they just go grab it off the web. It has been interesting the way technology has changed. When we first did this thing, the games were on videotapes. I mean, when we started getting serious in 1990, it's like, hey, if you're going to be an expert and you've got all these thousands of people who are buying these things, you have to know more about this material than the average guy. You can't just say you're an expert. You got to be good at it. So we had guys set up around the country where it's like, every time your team plays in the preseason, you videotape the game. Wow. And then here's our FedEx number. You send me the videotape, and in exchange for that, we'll give you a free subscription. So we have guys around the country who are sending in the videotapes of all the preseason games. I got a lot of black videotape. And so then I'm on. This is about the time I get taken out of the loop of being a guy who answers phones and stuff like that. Because, it takes an hour and a half, 2 hours to watch every one of those games. There's 16 games a week. I mean, that's like over half of a work week right there, not writing anything or doing anything other than just watching the game. So wow. It's been a fun, a lot of changes in platforms and technology. Of course, now with the preseason games, you get them online and you can toggle around. You can kind of look at like, oh, yeah, this guy Tony Pollard looks pretty good. Let me go back and just watch his 16 carries and try and get a feel for who is this guy? Is he going to be any good? Filling in, or you can get it's way easier to sort as opposed to having videotapes where you got, oh yeah, this guy, I think he carried in the third quarter, and plugging that in and hitting fast forward for 2 hours and then trying to find it, wheel around that way. The technology has really made everything a lot easier.
God, no doubt. It's completely, those early days, it changed fairly rapidly, because when you got into the late 1990s, the internet was fixed in there. And, it all had modified, and it's incredible. I remember stuffing envelopes like you did that, it was fun, but it was exhausting. And it sounds like you guys did really well back then, that time frame. So one thing I want to don't forget, you do remember Paul Paulson. I really liked that guy, and I thought he was a really great guy. And nobody remembers him, but you remember him. Paul Paulson from Minnesota.
Oh, you also, I'm glad to hear you also had a positive experience with Paul Paulson.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, he told me, and this is vague, I assume he's passed away now. I wish I could have talked to the guy, but I remember.
He passed away tragically, like in the 90s.
Oh, is that soon? Yeah.
He died early, young, but yeah, he would be my favorite of all the independent wholesaler guys.
Yeah, but he actually didn't he have Fantasy City? He had Fantasy City, didn't he? I recall he had a business.
I think there's multiple Paulsons.
Oh no!
And this guy I'm talking about was just a magazine dealer. Now there was a thing that happened in the 80s. Now, if you want to get the correct version of this story, you should talk to Bruce. He'll do a better job.
Okay.
There was the right-wing guys did not want Penthouse magazine and Playboy on the newsstands. They were like, hey, you guys are ruining America. You can't be selling Playboy magazine here. So they were trying to push out the right-wing Pat Robertson type guys. We don't want smut magazines. So when they somehow were able to lean on the main magazine distributors and get them to not carry those. Of course, there's still all of these magazines that need to find homes. And so a lot of these little independent magazine dealers they're picking up these porn magazines that the regular, if Adams News in Seattle isn't carrying Penthouse magazine, then, some other guy, Craig Sheik in Seattle, is going to be, well, I'll drive around with my truck and get those in some small gas stations because people are going to buy those. So those are the kind of guys that they're dealing with, a lot of small independent porn magazines, or maybe some kind of comic magazines that the big magazine dealers won't take. There are additional magazines. There's no internet in the 80s, so magazines were a lot more popular then. And if you can't get in with the big magazine dealers, there's these small independent guys who will get them on newsstands for you. Those were the guys that you were dealing with in the late 80s, and we were in that game also. And so they have how many magazines sell affects their bottom line and how well they're doing. And they worked real hard, did a good job of making sure, hey, which ones are selling? Can I get some more of those? Call up the guy. And there was a guy, Paulson. I can't remember if it was Paul Paulson or Pat Paulson, but he was in Minneapolis and he was awesome, but he did die tragically in the 90s.
Well, I'll have to research that, because the Paul Paulson I knew was in Minnesota. He had Fantasy City, which was a fantasy product, and he helped, ironically, way back in the 80s, pre-internet or whatnot, these people who ran contests, and it may have been early 90s too, you had to call in and then punch button to like change your roster or free agent bid or change your starting lineup. I don't know if you remember that. And
well, yeah, this is where the internet kind of changed all these kind of these things. I mean, we all benefited from stuff, but so when the internet came, it really cranked up and makes all those games a lot more viable. I mean, I remember the days of internet contests. I mean contests where you got a piece of paper and you're putting things down in pencil and then mailing them in. I did a couple of those in the early 90s.
Yeah, they were happening in the 80s too. We'll find out more about it. It says here you did some data-driven analysis, or have been doing it, or did in the past.
Well, yeah, this is the deal. If you're going to be a fantasy football expert, you got to figure out, hey, which players are going to do well. And I don't think readers want a list of the top 30 quarterbacks. They want to see some reasoning. Well, why are you putting this guy in the top 10? He has never been a top 20 quarterback before, and he's the number 7 quarterback on your board. What are the reasons for that? So you got to explain that. So we have looked into, we got to have something beyond just what everybody has access to. So we've done a lot of stuff with like cataloging plays. Let's get all the plays inside the 10-yard line and start sorting that big data different ways and figure out, hey, who's the most effective at running and catching and throwing down there?
Oh, that's cool.
Why is that happening? And then create a mixture of, hey, we do watch guys and there's what you see with your eyes, but then, hey, can we support that with some numbers? Because people are, they're hiring you to be their fantasy football guy. You got to bring something to the table. It's not just being a guy at the lunch counter at work who's everybody's got an opinion about this guy's good or that guy's bad. You gotta have something behind what you're saying. And I think people actually care more about the analysis that they're getting rather than, oh yeah, your pick was bad, my team did bad this year. They want to read your analysis, and then they're going to make up their own mind. They want to see some recommendations. They don't want to see a list that's just very similar to how the guys did last year, and it's a super similar list of what everybody else is publishing. They want to see who are the guys who are going to come on this year? Why are they going to come on? And who are the key guys who are going to fall off this year? And why are they going to fall off? Can you find a few things beyond the obvious and point out a few things? And if you can do that, then I think you can get people to say, yeah, I want to see what this guy has to say. So you got to work at that. And part of that is doing a lot of different stuff with numbers. So for me, I've got about 300 different files that have all kinds of different numbers in them. I like to look through those and then say, who are the top couple of guys here? Who are the bottom couple of guys? And invariably, as you're flipping through those, they'll be like, oh, God, I didn't realize Jared Cook was the most productive tight end in the league last year in the second half of the season. Those are facts that you're dealing with, and then can we organize those facts and start saying something that's sort of meaningful and maybe point somebody in the direction of a good pick or help them avoid a bad one.
That is good. Now, you did a lot of radio shows over the years. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we did some radio shows a lot in the 80s and 90s. Just radio station is going to call you. I like the question and answer stuff. I'm not a big fan of the, hey, explain what fantasy football is shows. I like, hey, let's get to beyond and just assume that your listener knows what it is and start talking about who's going to do well and who's not going to do well. So we've done some radio, and then we did the first TV show. That was down in Dallas, late 80s. I think it was the KLIF guys got in there. It was with Hank Stram and Gil Brandt, who teamed up on me. That's kind of my memory of those guys teamed up on me. And we did it. It was on cable. It repeated over and over.
And was it a
And
fantasy football show, or was it just a football show?
it was a fantasy football preview show.
Wow, in
And
the
there was
80s.
It was Hank Stram. It was Gil Brandt. Now, I was a fan of Hank Stram on the Monday night radio broadcasts. Back in the 70s and 80s, Monday Night Football, you're not going to believe this, it was not on live in Seattle because the local news didn't want to give up their broadcast. So it's like, well, instead of starting at 6, we're going to have our news at its regular 6 o'clock time slot, and then we'll just delay the Monday night game. We'll start it at 7. So being a true football fan, it's like, I don't want to wait till 7. I got to go to bed for school anyway. I would always listen to those things on the radio starting at 6. And Hank Stram and Jack Buck were always the radio guys.
I'll give you a parallel of that. I used to go to Seattle to work back in, I don't know, about that same time frame. And I remember going to the bar and watching the game. It was Dallas against Miami. And then I went back to my room and I turned on the radio, and the game was in the fourth quarter. And the game switched. The team who won switched. I think it was Miami ended up winning the game. And I felt like going back down to the bar and making some bets because that game was an hour delayed. How funny.
Yeah, welcome to Seattle.
I had no idea.
So anyway, Hank Stram had some unusual little phrases that he would use, and one of them was that he always used to use the term specialty teams. He used to always say, the New Orleans, they've got excellent specialty teams. And that was one of his catchphrases. So when I was down there in Dallas, I called him on it. I said, well, why do you always call them specialty teams instead of special teams? And him and Gil Brandt said, well, everybody calls them specialty teams. That's what they are. There's nothing special about them. They're specialists. So Gil Brandt backed him up on it and said, everybody in the NFL calls them specialty teams. That's what they are, rather than special, which logically kind of makes sense. They are specialists, but
yeah.
So they kind of ganged up on me and maintained that everybody calls them specialty teams.
So the big football guys defended each other. So do you remember the Carl Foster Florida radio show?
I don't think I worked with Carl Foster.
Yeah, Bob Harris says you and John Zeliski were on that show together. Don't remember that, huh?
Okay. Well,
not bad, doesn't it?
I was told that I'm sure I was on it.
Yeah, gotcha. I know what you mean.
Now, a lot of years have gone by since. That is sounding more familiar now.
Yeah, so, he said you guys were on that show.
But the name is seeming familiar.
It's probably been a while. What is this? So I ran out of questions. Do you have anything that off the top of your head you think would be interesting for the listeners and video watchers?
Well, beyond, I'm not a Seahawk fan. I'm in Seattle, but I'm not a Seahawk fan, have never been a Seahawk fan. That would be something a little different about how I was brought up. In Seattle, there's no football team in '72 when I became a fan. So I kind of latched on with the Pittsburgh Steelers a little bit. I like Franco Harris. I like the Immaculate Reception. I love watching the highlight show This Week in the NFL with Pat Summerall and Tom Brookshire. So I like the black jerseys that I saw with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I kind of latched on with them. They had won a couple of Super Bowls. And then, hey, there's this new team, the Seattle Seahawks. They're an expansion team. So I just kind of stuck with the Steelers. And so I do not have, I'm not one of the 12s.
Gotcha. So
and now I don't think I'm a football fan even.
So, back in 2011, the NFL had a strike and it really affected them and us. Do you think the NFL and the players are getting smart this year and are going to solve this before we damage our products?
They have a lot of time left. It seems like there's a rush and a crush to get this thing done. They have a long way to go. I hope the players don't hop in and take another bad deal way before they have to. seems like the owners all seem to win on these things. I'd like the players to use the leverage they have. Owners really want to get this thing wrapped up. I don't expect there'll be any missed games. It seems like the deal is going to happen. And what I think the correct play for the players is to, let a little more time pass or leverage that for a better deal. Looks like the owners are going to get everything they want, as it usually happens. Looks like there's going to be a 17th game, which means another week to do more analysis, another 16 games that'll need to be written up.
Exactly.
But yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that stretching into a missed game or missed preseason games. That for myself, I think it will happen.
Yeah. Well, maybe they'll go down like one preseason game sometime. Of course, they make money on the preseason games too, so they probably don't want to shrink them all down.
Well, I think going down to 3 preseason games, I don't think we'd miss anything. So somewhere along the lines, the teams all agreed that, hey, preseason games are meaningless and nobody plays anybody if, nothing happens in the 4th preseason games. And really the first 3 aren't even that mean. Yeah, got more and more of these coaches like Sean McVay who don't think there's any value in playing guys in preseason games. So
it seemed to me this last year it was even worse. It seemed like there was just not much going on in those games to pick from, which is tough on you and I because we're trying to pull out some information in between just a few important plays, usually in the first quarter, and then maybe we want to watch somebody later who's this brand new guy, but then he's playing against third string guys, and it's just like, man, it's so hard to try and really understand, can I gain some knowledge? It's really difficult. But that's part of our job.
To hop in a time machine, go back and see, hey, what were preseason games like in the early 70s when they're playing 6?
I remember that. 6 preseason games.
Well, there's a lot of preseason games in the mid-70s.
I bet nobody remembers that. Yeah, I remember that. That was just crazy, 6 preseason games. That just sounds so obtuse right now. It's crazy.
Or 7 if you are the Super Bowl champion and you're playing against the college all-star team. Remember that game?
Nope, don't remember.
In Chicago? They used to have, that would be like the first game every year would be the Super Bowl champions are going to play a college all-star team in Chicago. And it was, I can't imagine that. Can you imagine a team where it's like, Kyler Murray's going to be the quarterback? Whoever you took in the first round, he's got to go to Chicago to play with all the other rookies against the Super Bowl champs. And you can imagine somebody getting hurt in that game. I mean, it was a crazy idea.
So I know you love to play auction. Is that still something you do? And is it your favorite way to draft or not?
I prefer the auction. I want to have access to everybody. I mean, if I really feel like, Lamar Jackson is the guy I want to have the ability to outbid everybody. I prefer auctions. Probably half the leagues I'm in are auction leagues, and then there's a few draft ones that I'm also still doing. But auctions are the way to go, I think. I mean, there's those 20 guys who are the super key guys that you really want to allocate. And I don't want those guys going to the teams that happen to, there's going to be a certain layout of your team is going to be affected by, are you the first pick or the 12th pick or the 10th pick? And where you pick is going to dictate your first 2 guys. And I don't think that's the right way to go.
Why do you think...
Another way was Drawction. Have you ever tried one of those?
Say it again.
The Drawction, the combination draft auction. That actually makes a lot of sense, where it's like, hey, let's auction off 4 players, 5 players, and then start drafting after that. So I haven't actually tried one, but it's been explained to me, and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I haven't tried that. It may be fun to do that because, once you get past the first few rounds, then it would be interesting. I think they're both great. I love auction. I don't play it very much, and it's interesting that, very few people play auctions, and I think the reason is, and you can put your input in, is the people I see locally are afraid of auctions because if they're not prepared, they're going to get beat up. Where I can just grab a cheat sheet if I'm not studying very much, and I can just say, every 12 picks, I'll take the next guy. And auctions,
Agreed.
You can't do that.
Yeah. The auction it's taking the draft and then turning it into a really complex math problem. Hey, do we want to do that. I mean, I remember one time I tried a couple of baseball drafts in the early 90s. It's like, hey, this is like there's way too many numbers and categories, and
Yeah.
there's way too many things going here. So there is a beauty in just being able to sit back and enjoy a draft. Now, when you get into the auction and you're in a group of people and you do the auction every year, everybody learns what people are worth. Everybody knows what the top running back's gone for the last 10 years, and everybody kind of settles on. And there's no getting steals in our leagues. Everybody knows, oh, yeah, Ian and Mike are both going to try and hang back and get values. So we'll just get those guys up. And, yeah, there's no steal. If you want to get steals in an auction, you either got to play against guys that don't know what an auction is, or play against guys that you've at least never competed against before. But if you're in there with that same group of guys, everybody just kind of they develop immunity to the strategies that you're trying, and everybody figures out, hey, this guy likes to hang back, and this guy's what guys are worth. So.
Yeah, you certainly, in any draft, you got to know your co-managers or your opponents in a draft. A guy may be a Pittsburgh fan or a Dallas fan, and you kind of know he's going to take guys later, so you can say, okay, if I really want this guy, take him later, or let him have him early, and then he's wasting a draft. He's spending too much on a player, that kind of thing. So that definitely goes into draft strategy, period. Well, great. Thank you so much, and you're definitely... Ian, you're definitely a pioneer of fantasy sports, and I really appreciate you getting your history down on it.
Well, thank you, Emma. It's nice to talk to you. Since you and I have been doing kind of the same thing here for 30, 35 years, we've been living parallel lives doing this thing, and so it's kind of interesting to swap notes and figure out, hey, here's how you ran into that, and here's how we did that, and this is how it went for us, and so it's always nice to visit with you.
Yes, thank you so much. We will talk soon. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Emil.